Hello children, in today's class we are going to discuss major themes of crime and punishment. So I have listed the major themes here. The idea of the Superman, the criminal as hero, the power of suffering, the power of fate, the effectiveness of punishment, religious redemption, the last one is alienation. So let us now see the first one, the idea of the Superman in the novel Crime and Punishment. So if you see at the beginning of the novel, Raskolnikov is actually the hero of the novel. He sees himself as a Superman. Okay, so this is the idea that he conceives. He conceives himself as a Superman, a person who is extraordinary and thus above the moral rules that govern the rest of humanity. And his estimation of himself compels him to separate himself from society. So his murder of the pawnbroker is in part a consequence of his belief that he is above the law and an attempt to establish the truth of his superiority. So Raskolnikov's inability to quell his subsequent feelings of guilt, however, proves to him that he is not a Superman. So although he realizes his failure to live up to what he has envisioned for himself, he is nevertheless unwilling to accept the total deconstruction of his identity. So he continues to resist the idea that he is as mediocre as the rest of the humanity by maintaining to himself that the murder was justified. So it is only in his final surrender to his love for Sonia that he realizes. So Raskolnikov originally justifies the murder of Alyona Ivanovna, that is the pawnbroker, on utilitarian grounds, claiming that the laws has been removed from society. Okay, that is the evil. The evil here is the pawnbroker, the lady, has been removed from society. So whether or not the murder is actually a utilitarian act, we do not know, but Raskolnikov is certainly a nihilist. So nihilism, I believe you know, nihilism was a philosophical position developed in Russia in the year, that is in the 1850s and 1860s, that is known for negating more, in the words of Nietzsche. That is, it rejected family and societal bonds and the emotional and aesthetic concerns in favor of a strict materialism, or the idea that there is no mind or soul outside of the physical world. So here Raskolnikov is certainly a nihilist, and completely he is unsentimental for most of the novel because he cares nothing about the emotions of others. Similarly, he utterly disregards social conventions that run counter to the austere interactions that he desires with the world. However, at the end of the novel, as Raskolnikov discovers love, he throws off his nihilism. So through this action, the novel condemns nihilism as empty. So this is the idea of Superman that is discussed in the novel. Now we are moving on to the second major theme, the criminal as hero. So here Raskolnikov is a criminal in the novel. How would you feel about somebody who killed two women with an axe? Could you think of him sympathetically? So these are the questions Dostoevksy asks you to do just that in Crime and Punishment. Dostoevksy, he creates a character who is part cold-blooded killer and part compassionate human being. So he is a dual personality. Raskolnikov is a dual personality. So part he is a cold-blooded killer and part he is a compassionate human being. So the struggle between these two parts of Raskolnikov's character, his dual personality, is actually the central theme of the novel. Dostoevsky explores his character's duality in several ways. He shows his protagonist widely contrasting actions, and he compares Raskolnikov to vastly different people. Raskolnikov is like the self-sacrificing in his concern for people who need help, and like the decadent Shivadri Gailo in his extreme selfishness. So he seeks the challenge of even Porphyry, the investigator, to test his intellectual powers and the love of Sonia, to learn about the possibility of forgiveness. So while readers may differ in their feelings about Raskolnikov, most of the readers, they all agree that Raskolnikov's experiences are the central focus of the novel. So this is the second thing, the criminal as hero. Now we will see the third one. So the power of suffering. So what is the power of this suffering? Why he has used this as Dostoevsky, why he has used this as a major theme in his novel? So that we must know. And in this novel, if you see, we find two people suffering throughout. That is from the beginning till the end. One is Sonia, and the second character is none other than our protagonist Raskolnikov. So Sonia and Raskolnikov, they think differently about suffering. Sonia believes that suffering makes a person a better human being, and that it can be even endured because God will reward the sufferer. That is Sonia's concept of understanding suffering. And she can go on living because she believes that all her misery will help her family and even Raskolnikov and everyone, because she believes that God will not let her down. So that's why she happily takes up her suffering. She sacrifices her life for the sake of her family. She enters into prostitution to protect her siblings. So she happily takes up suffering on her shoulder. But if you see Raskolnikov insists that suffering is wasted misery. So these are the two different contradictions that we see. So Sonia takes up suffering happily, and Raskolnikov, he insists that suffering is wasted misery. And he is impatient with self-sacrifice and intolerant of the notion that God cares. And many readers even agree with this view that any good that comes of misery is coincidental and insufficient to justify so much self-torture. So here he undergoes the self-torture. Both of them undergoes the self-torture, both Sonia and Raskolnikov. The structure of the novel proves that Dostoevsky's point of view is like Sonia's. It's most of the time we feel that Dostoevsky's point of view is like Sonia's, because we have to take up all the sufferings happily. Suffering is both necessary and useful. This is Sonia's concept. Its efficacy is proved by Raskolnikov's redemption. And that is about suffering. The next major theme that is used in the novel is the power of fate. See, fate or destiny plays a vital role in this fiction. Right from the beginning, that is the entry of Lizaveta, whom he unexpectedly Raskolnikov murders. So this itself is the best example how destiny plays a major role in the novel. Fate means different things in Crime and Punishment. So Raskolnikov says over and over that fate causes actions. He blames or he puts the blame on fate, saying that causes actions. For instance, when he overhears that the pawnbroker will be alone, he says fate ordains that he will kill her. So when he overhears the conversation, he says that it is because of fate. Fate wants him to be the murderer, or him to commit or to remove the lies from the society. So Dostoevsky rejects and wants the reader to reject this notion of fate as the power that predetermines events. So he wants us to be aware of all these things, and he says that this notion of fate as the power that predetermines events, we should reject all these things. The novel makes very clear that Raskolnikov chooses to act despite his own eagerness to blame fate. But fate also means the doom or ruin of a character as the consequences of his actions and behavior. Fate does not play a part in Raskolnikov's story, at least until the miraculous change in the epilogue. Raskolnikov determines that his own destruction by the things that he does. In other words, his fate is to commit crime because of his arrogance and to be punished for that crime. So fate as the inevitable consequence of man's actions is actually a recurrent theme in the great classical tragedies, if you see. And many readers also, they think that Raskolnikov actually resembles the tragic heroes whose personalities doom them to disaster. And that's about the power of fate. And the next, the effectiveness of punishment. So what is the effectiveness? What is this effectiveness of this punishment, and does Raskolnikov change at the end? So it's a big question that comes in the title itself, crime and punishment. So we have to analyze this theme also. So can punishment actually rehabilitate a criminal? See, you can see punishment that is given to this criminal. Can punishment rehabilitate a criminal? Dostoevsky says the answer is yes. See, under particular circumstances. Dostoevsky insists that when Raskolnikov recognizes that his alienation from mankind and his egotism are wrong, he is ready to put his crime behind him and become a new man. So the fact that he is in prison being punished by the state, that seems coincidental to his new awareness of his guilt. All of the agony he suffers after the murder is as much a punishment as the prison term. So that itself is the punishment. The agony that he undergoes after the murder is itself the punishment. So one of his most painful realizations is that he does not measure up to his own expectations for himself. And in the final analysis, his rehabilitation is possible because Sonia's love and Porfiry's willingness to wait prepare him to accept Christian ethics as his ruling principle. So the rest of the criminals and the evil doers aren't so lucky. If you see, as they are, unloved, they are doomed according to Dostoevsky, and they cannot be rehabilitated. So here, that a change comes in Raskolnikov at the end of the novel, that is in the epilogue. And next important point is religious redemption. See, after Raskolnikov commits the two murders, he finds himself confronted with the desperate need to be reconciled with God and his fellow man. So from the beginning of the story, Raskolnikov is portrayed as somewhat alienated from his fellows. But once he commits the murders, he experiences a decisive break, both spiritually and psychologically, from the rest of humanity. Indeed, when he murders the old pawnbroker and her sister, something within Raskolnikov also dies. And these murders, the death which separate Raskolnikov both from God and his fellow men, can only be reversed through a miracle of divine grace and power. So, in the novel, the biblical paradigm for this great miracle is the story of the rising of Lazarus. So just as Lazarus died and was then restored to life through the miraculous power of God, that is in Christ, so as also in Dostoevsky's story, Raskolnikov's death is neither permanent nor irreversible. So he too can be restored to life. He too can be reconciled with God and man. And if you see, in addition, the rising of Lazarus is mentioned at least 3 times in the novel. One time is when, in the midst of the heated discussion with Porfiry, Porfiry specifically asks Raskolnikov whether he believes in the rising of Lazarus, to which Raskolnikov responds that he does. So this is one episode. And secondly, the only extended portion of scripture cited in the novel relates the story of Lazarus. In fact, it's Raskolnikov himself tormented by what he does. He asks Sonia to read him the story. This is the second episode. And the third time, that is finally at the end of the novel, the rising of Lazarus is mentioned yet again. And this time, as Raskolnikov recollects Sonia's previous reading of the story to him, interestingly, this final reference to the rising of Lazarus occurs actually in the context of Raskolnikov's own restoration to life. And if you see, the last concept or the major theme is alienation. So alienation is the primary theme of crime and punishment. At first, Raskolnikov's pride separates him from society. He sees himself as superior to all other people and so cannot relate to anyone. And within his personal philosophy, he sees other people as tools and uses them for his own ends. So after committing the murders, his isolation grows because of his intense guilt and half delirium. So in the